60 Minutes Rewind.
The Kid, the Cop, and the Knife. It happened in Milwaukee more than 2 decades ago, an incident as familiar as the front page of any newspaper. White cop kills armed black suspect, case of self-defense. We report this story not to point up particular social issues. Those issues will be obvious as the story proceeds, but to show how a crime and the punishment affected one man. Shakespeare said, "Conscience doth make cowards of us all." Conscience in this case had a somewhat different effect.
Louis Krause, an ex-Milwaukee policeman, age 49. He left the force 22 years ago. If there is such a thing as a broken man, then Louis Krause is one. Louis Krause was cursed by a memory.
Forget about it. Forget about it. That's what they all told me. We know you lied for Grady, but forget about it. It's over and done with.
It was indeed over, but it was far from done with. What haunted Louis Krause was an incident that happened here.
Wright Street, Milwaukee, the night of February 2nd, 1958. 2 young police officers, Louis Krause and Tom Grady, on patrol, stop here for a cigarette. A car goes by with a broken taillight. The driver of the car is a black man named Daniel Bell, 22 years old. They stop the car, and according to the police story, Bell jumps out of the car, slashes at Grady with a knife, shouts, "You won't get me, you sons of bitches, I'm a hold-up man," and he runs away. The police give chase. They fire several warning shots. They commandeer a car and continue the chase. The police finally catch up with Bell about a half-mile away here on North 6th Street. According to the police story, Bell lunges at Grady again with that knife. Grady fires his pistol, and Daniel Bell is dead. The investigation finds it a case of justifiable homicide that Grady fired in self-defense. And that is the official police version.
Well, there was a chase. There were shots fired. But there is a criminal act in the very heart of the police story, an act that has not yet taken place as the 2 officers stand over the dead boy. Krause recalls Officer Grady's words 20 years later.
And he said, I think he's dead. He says, I don't feel a pulse. And I took off my glove and I put my right hand down into the side of the neck, and there was no pulse. And I said, yes, he is dead. You've shot and killed him. He said, okay. We got to cover this thing up. I says, it's an accident. It's over and done with. I said, I'm going in to make some phone calls, get some help. And by this time, he started fumbling in his jacket for a knife or a weapon. And he pulled out a little knife. And I just stood there. I was really shocked that he would even be trying to do something like this. And he put the little knife back in his pocket, and he opened his jacket, and he pulled out a bigger knife. And he placed it in the man's hand. And I said, Tom, what are you covering this thing up for? What are you looking for a knife for? He says, just a goddamn kid anyhow. And he repeated that 2 or 3 times.
And a few minutes later, a team of detectives arrived and began investigating the shooting. The man in charge of that investigation was Detective Sergeant Edwin Schaefer.
Schaefer asked me, Detective Sergeant Schaefer, did the man have the knife when you walked up to his body the first time to check his jugular vein? And I said, there were no knives involved except the knives that came from Grady's jacket pockets.
So far, Louis Krause is sticking to the facts as he saw them that night. The next morning, February 3rd, 1958, he and Officer Grady reported here to the then police headquarters, to Chief of Detectives Rudolph Glazer and his staff. And then the 2 patrolmen, along with the senior officers, went all together to see the then district attorney, William McCauley.
Mr. McCauley picked up the pad of papers, and he read my report, and he read Grady's report, and he read a couple other reports, looked up at Inspector Glazer and said, there's too many conflicting things. Get the hell out of here and get me a story that I can defend. So we got up to the detective bureau, and 2 detectives came in. shortly thereafter and said, "You have to change your story, Krause. That's not the way it happened."
Who are these two?
I have no comment at this point.
Why not?
I have to plead the fifth.
You don't want to name the two guys who...
No, I do not. As far as I'm concerned, one is still a law enforcement officer. Don't know about the other one. I don't know if he's retired or if he's dead or what. So they told me what to write, and I wrote, and I signed my name to it. I then got a very sour feeling in my stomach. I didn't know what Grady had written at this point. I didn't know what the detectives and the other officers at the scene had put in their reports. I didn't know if I was getting set up to make it look as if I did the shooting.
Did you tell anybody?
Who was I to tell?
Did you confide in anybody?
Nobody. Nobody. Who was I to trust? Who could I trust? Could I go to the chief and say, "This isn't the way it was"?
So Krause went along with the cover-up, with Grady's account of the shooting.
A simple case of self-defense. But in order to really make the story stick, everyone involved had to tell the same story.
How far away was the gun from Bell when he was shot? Was Grady's weapon from Bell?
I would say within a foot.
Inside a foot?
Right.
One of the first investigating officers was Russell Vorpagel, then a Milwaukee detective. For the past 20 years, Vorpagel has been an FBI agent, but he recalls vividly the night of February 2nd, 1958, and his first questions to Tom Grady.
I asked him, "How far away were you, Tom?" And he showed me where it was. And we measured it, and it was 23 feet, 9 inches. I went in and started writing the report. This is when the lieutenant of the shift came in and said, "We're going to have to change this report. It doesn't follow the report that Grady's making." And I said, "Well, I'm writing what I saw."
The local papers began hinting that there were conflicting stories inside the Milwaukee Police Department. But whatever discrepancies there were would surely come out in the coroner's inquest that was ordered by District Attorney McCauley. Before you testified at the inquest, did they rehearse you to make sure your story jibed with Grady's?
Yes,
You gave the whole story as Grady might have given it,
that's
correct?
right. Because I was reading it right off my report. Off the report they made me write.
But it was clear to Russell Vorpagel, who also testified, that D.A. McCauley had no interest in getting at the truth.
When we testified, however, it was yes or no answers, and we didn't have the opportunity to explain our answers. They showed me a knife and said, "Have you ever seen this knife before?" And I said, "Yes." And they did not follow up any more questions.
From the beginning, when they said it, that he drew a knife, I knew better, than that he didn't have a knife, because he wasn't that type person who carries a knife. And I did not believe it.
Daniel Bell had lived with his older sister, Sylvia. Young Bell did have a record, mainly for traffic violations. Sylvia Bell speculates that the reason he ran away that night was that he was driving without a license. She learned of her brother's death from television news.
When I walked into that police force, they said, like, "A nigger, get out of here." That was the word. That's the way they throwed it at us. I never will forget, because when we went down there, we asked questions, and as I say, they ran us out. But it did come out that they planted the knife in my brother's right hand. And my brother was definitely left-handed. And that's one, that was really, we really knew from the beginning.
Well, did you say that at the inquest, that they found this knife in my brother's
Yes.
right hand? He was a left-handed person?
Yes, we did. We even had our attorney to try to, tell them that this boy were left-handed. He was not right-handed.
And what did they say?
They ignored it. They didn't say a word.
What was the attitude on the force, in the Milwaukee force, back in those days, towards black people?
Very prejudiced.
In what ways?
Instead of giving them a break, they would give him a ticket or arrest him. I saw him put him on the elevator in the old safety building and give him an elevator ride.
What does that mean?
Going to the top floor, back down to the garage, and literally beating the shit out of him.
Did you ever complain to anybody?
Who are you going to complain to? Who would you complain to? The chief? Your boss? He was probably just as prejudiced as the guy walking the beat.
The all-white jury at the coroner's inquest gave its verdict. Tom Grady acted justifiably in shooting Daniel Bell. What happened to Lou Krause after this, after that night and that inquest, and what'd you do?
I guess I took the easy course of action and started drinking.
And getting into trouble?
Yeah, got fired from the police department.
A few months later, Tom Grady resigned from the police force and moved out to Colorado. But for Krause, the years between 1958 and 1979 were a story of alcoholism, crime, prison, divorce, and despair.
I was trying to patch my life together and got sent to prison and
For?
theft. I gave it an awful lot of thought the 15 or 15 and a half months that I was in the Wisconsin prison system. I gotta do something. Number one, I gotta show my wife and family that I'm gonna straighten myself out.
Inside, Krause asked to be sent to an alcoholic clinic where he learned to beat his drinking problem. When he was released from prison, he enrolled in a course that would teach him how to treat other alcoholics. The method was group encounter, students squaring off with each other, telling each other what they really thought of them. One of the sessions with a woman became violent.
She got me down and started beating my head on the ground, on the floor. And this thing surfaced.
What'd you say?
I was petrified. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say, and I ran out of the couple people.
When you say it surfaced, you mean you blurted something out, or?
No, I thought of it.
You mean you hadn't thought of it in all those years?
Right. Instead of really taking a good look at myself and saying, this is what the problem is, get it out once and for all. Bring it out into the open. I didn't dare. I went to church and prayed that the good Lord would give me strength to pick up the phone and call the district attorney. At that point, I guess I forgot about how bad or good I would look. I was hoping that I wouldn't become a hero because I'm not a hero. And I picked up the phone and I called the district attorney. I said, I gotta see you. I've got something to tell you. You may not believe what I'm gonna tell you, but the sooner the better.
It was a shocking, surprising story. I had been in college when it occurred, and I had not heard of the incident.
Mike McCann is the current Milwaukee district attorney. After hearing Krause's story, he told his assistant DA, Tom Schneider, to take a closer look at this bit of ancient history. Tom, where were you? How old were you that night in 1958 when Daniel Bell was shot?
In 1958, I was in grade school. I was 11 years old. It didn't mean anything to me then. But when he came forward and told the story, there was a ring of truth to what he was saying. Something that causes you to say, hey, there's something here, let's look further, let's see if there's something to it, see if we can make a case.
So young Schneider dug into the police files, and there was all the evidence. The bullet that killed Daniel Bell, the knife, and Daniel Bell's coat still bearing the powder burns that proved he was shot at close range. Never in the state's history had a criminal case that old been reopened. But the DA's job was not easy, given the nature of his key witness, Louis Krause.
You should recognize, too, that, of course, even in his admission to the case, he was saying that he himself had committed perjury. So you've got a man with a felony record who spent time in the state penitentiary, who's an admitted perjurer with a history of alcoholism. I knew that there'd be tremendous problems of proof because even his unreliability, his criminal record in our state is grounds to question his credibility. And I knew that that would emerge during the progress of the case, obviously. And insofar as Grady was the only other individual with direct knowledge of what happened there in the street scene, it was profoundly important to get some type of admission from Grady.
How do you do that? Get a man to change a story he's been sticking to for 20 years. Grady'd been living in Colorado all those years, and he and Krause had kept in touch. They occasionally spoke on the phone. So the district attorney got a court order allowing him to tap conversations between the two men. He then asked Louis Krause to call Grady to try to get him to admit to the truth of what happened in the Daniel Bell shooting.
Well, to be very honest with you, Tom, I would like to discuss this farther with you.
Man, if something like this came out now, man, I'd lose everything, you know.
During the first conversation, there was no clear smoking gun.
But in the next conversation?
In the next conversation when they talked, he essentially admitted that he had planted the knife.
See, I don't know what you were thinking about, Tom, when you pulled that knife out of your pocket and put it in that guy's hand. I mean, goddamn, I can't get that through my mind.
Well, remember how they always used to say in police training school, if something like that happens, stick a knife in their hand, cut them, stick a gun in his hand or something, you know. Mm-hmm. Protect yourself. You're innocent, but protect yourself.
Grady, when told of the evidence against him, waived extradition and returned to Milwaukee. There was no trial because he pled guilty. Some say he did so because he assumed he would get off with a suspended sentence given that the shooting had taken place so long ago. But here in this courtroom, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison, 5 years for reckless homicide, 2 years for perjury. Had Grady continued to live in Wisconsin for 6 years after the shooting, there was no way under the state statute of limitations that he could have been brought before a judge at all. Krause continued to live in Wisconsin and was thus immune from prosecution. Do you think that Grady was harshly treated by the court when they sent him to jail for 5 years plus 2?
I think it was very unfair, and I've got empathy putting myself in Grady's shoes. I think he's carried this thing around for 22 years, and now all of a sudden he gets sent to prison.
All because Lou Krause's conscience got the better of him.
That's right. That's correct. And I'm going to tell you something. I want a good, clear conscience. If I'm right or wrong in your eyes or anybody else's eyes, I've got to meet my maker. Nobody else is going to meet him for me, but me.
Do you think that the sentence of Grady, 5 years plus 2, 7 years in all, was a just sentence?
No, that's not just at all. That's not right. I mean, that man should have had the maximum. See, they did as much damage to us as they did to my brother. They killed us, too. They really did.
What would have happened had he not planted the knife, do you think?
I think it would have came out as an accidental shooting by a police officer. And maybe today, both of us would still be on the police department or near retirement. Only God would know that.
You don't think he meant to kill him or meant to shoot him?
I think he meant to shoot him, but I don't think he meant to kill him. There's a big difference.
For a broken taillight?
Yeah. That's what it boiled down to.
There are still a number of loose ends to this story. On one of those tapes, Grady indicates that there are people still in the Milwaukee police force who are part of the cover-up, but Grady refuses to name names. A number of people who Krause says were involved are dead. District Attorney McCauley, Chief of Detectives Rudolph Glazer. Others are alive but retired. Among them, Detective Sergeant Edwin Schaefer and former Police Chief Howard Johnson. Both Schaefer and Johnson are defendants in a federal civil case that Sylvia Bell and her family are bringing against the city of Milwaukee and the police department. Milwaukee's city attorney has refused to allow any of the defendants to be interviewed. The Bell family is suing for $100 million for the wrongful death and the violation of the civil rights of Daniel Bell.